Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. Have you ever wondered why life-altering events just seem to happen completely out of nowhere? Like why massive disasters, whether they're deeply personal or globally significant, appear to strike with absolutely zero warning? Well, today we're unpacking a really dramatic historical anecdote that reveals a profound, universal truth about how our world actually works. We're looking closely at the illusion of sudden change, and we're going to focus our lens on the absolutely harrowing true story of the Mount Sale landslide.
I want you to just picture this scene for a moment. The setting sun cast a magnificent crimson hue over the plateau. Shepherds herded their flocks back home. A picturesque scene of early spring pastoral return. It sounds idyllic, right? It's early spring. The evening air is crisp. There's a bit of yellow dust rolling in the distance. Dogs are barking in the courtyards. Sheep are bleating as they're being corralled. And you've got these warm wisps of cooking smoke gently rising from village rooftops nestled in China's Gansu province. It's literally the absolute perfect picture of tranquility. A rural community just slowly winding down for the evening, feeling completely safe, secure, and totally at peace in their homes.
But then, suddenly, the earth trembled. That calm? It was a total illusion. In an instant, literally like a giant bomb detonating right under their feet, this dense, terrifying yellow column of smoke just billowed up from the supposedly tranquil summit of the towering Mount Sale. Animals panic instantly, scattering in every conceivable direction, and before anyone could even begin to process the immense disaster that had just been unleashed, the massive mountain itself abruptly shrank. The solid ground completely gave way beneath them. Sturdy walls collapsed inward, and entire multi-generational villages were violently leveled to rubble in just a fraction of a second.
And then came the mud. 20. That is the number you really need to wrap your head around here. 20 meters per second. That's how terrifyingly fast this was moving. Halfway up the collapsing mountain, a roaring, rolling wave of thick mud surged forward, becoming this high-speed avalanche of earth rushing relentlessly down into the valley. I mean, just try to picture that kind of sheer physical force bearing down on you. People were screaming, crying, dropping everything to desperately try and outrun the Grim Reaper right at their backs. But against a moving wall of earth traveling at 20 meters every single second, that's an absolutely impossible race to win.
When the thick dust finally settled just a few short minutes later, that terrible, serene silence of the wilderness actually returned, but the cost was unimaginable. 237. According to Zhang Yi's urgent report on China's ecological collapse, that is the number of men, women, and children from 3 surrounding villages who were tragically buried alive. 237 lives just extinguished in minutes, alongside over 400 head of livestock. You know, this wasn't a myth. It wasn't science fiction or some cautionary fable. It was a harrowing, irreversible, and permanent reality for the families left behind.
So it makes you wonder, was it a natural disaster? When news of this incomprehensible catastrophe eventually spread to neighboring areas, the immediate consensus among the locals was to simply blame the unpredictable, violent wrath of nature. To them, the mountain just fell. The sky simply collapsed. It was viewed as an act of heaven, a devastating fluke of geology and weather that literally no human being could possibly predict, let alone control. And honestly, it was probably easier to accept it as a tragic twist of fate rather than look deeper into the soil.
But we have to ask a far more unsettling alternative. Or was this a man-made calamity? We have to fundamentally challenge the idea that this was just some random, uncontrollable natural disaster. We can't just accept the narrative of a spontaneous mountain collapse without digging into the context. To answer this, our source text points us toward a deeply personal, hidden tragedy that happened right before the mountain fell. It's a micro-event, but it holds the terrifying key to understanding the macro disaster that wiped out 3 entire villages.
This brings us to a really deeply intimate and heartbreaking story. The author recounts a vivid memory of his distant uncle who was just out irrigating a field one afternoon. His young son was happily playing nearby. They had been watering the ground for less than 2 hours when suddenly the seemingly flat, stable earth beneath the boy just gave way into a massive sinkhole. By the time the uncle realized what was happening, his child had vanished without a trace, swallowed mercilessly by the sinking earth. The family cried for 3 days and 3 nights, but this awful, unbearable tragedy proved something absolutely vital. The ground wasn't collapsing randomly. It was sinking precisely because it was being heavily watered.
So, the crucial point is, the collapse of Mount Sale wasn't random at all. Let's trace the historical timeline of human intervention here. First, the government built the massive Lujiacaxia reservoir. Then, the local population was forcibly relocated away from their homes and moved to an area full of fragile ravines and unstable gullies.
Finally, just to survive and to follow the era's really aggressive push to conquer nature by literally aiming to turn barren mountains into fertile fields, they heavily terraced the land. They brought constant irrigation from the plains all the way up to the plateau. For years, they relentlessly pumped water into a fragile, porous mountain that simply couldn't handle it. Those heroic efforts to fight heaven and earth slowly, invisibly doomed the mountain until it finally, violently surrendered.
Which brings us to a much broader, macro-philosophical principle. The devastating collapse of Mount Sale is actually a perfect, tragic illustration of this exact concept. The big change happens in an instant. Monumental, catastrophic transformations erupt suddenly and completely when people least expect them. See, the mountain didn't fall a little bit every day. It didn't give off small daily warnings that everyone could clearly see. It held its shape, maintaining the illusion of absolute stability, until one specific, catastrophic moment when its structural integrity reached zero, and the whole shebang just gave way at once.
And once you see this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere in our history. Think about the Tangshan earthquake in 1976, the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks, the dropping of the Hiroshima atomic bomb, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the infamous sinking of the Titanic. Whether we're talking about massive global historical events that alter the course of humanity, a sudden train derailment, a plane crash, or even a completely unexpected heart attack, monumental disasters always seem to explode out of thin air. They materialize rapidly, completely catching humanity off guard and shifting our entire reality in mere seconds.
And this brilliantly illustrates the illusion we live under every single day. Just consider the Titanic. When the colossal iceberg quietly approached, the clutches of death took hold of their lives. The passengers on that massive, luxurious ship were joyful. They were celebrating, dining, just completely oblivious to any impending danger. To them, the disaster happened in a terrifying, chaotic instant. But the stark reality is, a fatal, invisible change was silently creeping up on them long before the physical impact. The collision was just the final, explosive result of a quiet trajectory that had been set hours before. So why exactly do big changes happen in an instant? Well, here is the ultimate cause and really the core message of this entire explainer. Small changes gradually occur. This is the invisible, silent buildup that acts as the hidden catalyst for all monumental events. It's the heavy agricultural water seeping into the mountain for years, the massive iceberg drifting slowly into the commercial shipping lane, the plaque quietly building up, day by day, in a patient's artery. Big changes only happen instantly because they are directly propelled by the unseen, gradual accumulation of tiny, silent changes leading right up to that exact breaking point.
Let's move on and see how this builds. To really grasp this, we just have to look at the contrast. Think about the gradual things in life. Plants slowly growing in a garden. The reality of aging day by day, the sun quietly setting across the evening sky, or a disease silently developing inside the body. We rarely ever see these things happening in real time. But then think about the instant: violent earthquakes, massive landslides, sudden heart attacks, entire mountain collapses. The loud, terrifying, catastrophic outcomes of the instant are entirely born from and fueled by those quiet, invisible processes of the gradual.
Which leaves us with a final, really provocative question. Who can see the specific changes as we age day by day? I mean, you can't see a plant growing if you just sit there and stare at it, but it is undeniably growing. The exact same principle applies to us, to our lives, and to our entire world. The Mount Say landslide teaches us a haunting lesson: silence absolutely does not mean stability. So as you go about your day, ask yourself, what small, unseen, gradual accumulations are quietly shaping your own future right now? The small changes gradually occur so that the big changes can happen in an instant. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.